Breaking tonight at 11, a live look right now at the Senate floor where lawmakers have passed a bipartisan agreement to fund the government until the end of January. Voting finally broke the gridlock after hours. Now, this could be a major first step, but not the last, to ending this government shutdown. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sydney Stallworth. Atlanta News First, Alani Latane joins us in studio now. And Alani, the Senate just wrapped up this crucial vote. What has come out of all of this?
Yeah, so here's what we know so far, that lawmakers appear to have reached a deal, the Senate voting 60-40 in a step towards reopening the government. Now, this comes after 8 Democratic centrists reached a deal with GOP leaders. And in that deal, it would fund the government through January 30th, which would set up another deadline early next year. It would also guarantee a December vote on government health care subsidies. Now, Democrats have demanded the Trump administration extend the subsidies for a year to prevent health care premiums from skyrocketing for millions of Americans. There are still more steps ahead before the shutdown comes to an end. The bill would go to the White House next, and the shutdown wouldn't end until the president signs this into effect. We do know that both Georgia Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff voted against the deal. And again, just reiterating, there is more to come before the government can reopen. Any one senator can delay consideration of the package for several days. And again, the White House will have to adopt the deal struck in the Senate before it gets to President Trump's desk.